Is the continuation of this is not without the soul of the in the purpose of the another continuation of the knowledge that will be considered and the mention of if you are not Srimad Bhagavatam into 2, chapter 5, text 19. Arya, Arya, Arya,
Bandhanti nityada muktam
Badnanti nityada muktam
Mayinam purusham gunaha
Mayinam purusham gunaha Nanti nityada muktam
Mayinam Purusham Gunaha
Mayinam purusham gunaha
Karya karana kartritve
Karya karana kartritve
Dravya gnana kriyasraya
Dravya jnana kriyashraya
Pannanti nityada muktam
Badnanti nityada muktam
Maina purusham guna
Mayinam purusham gunaha
Karya karana kartritve
Karya karana kartritve
Dravya gnana kriyasraya
Dravya jnana kriyashraya
Pannanti nityada muktam
Vadnanti yada muktam
Mainam purusham gunaha
Mayinam purusham
Karya karana kartrite
Karya karana
karana kartrite
Jnana kriyasraya
Dravya
Dravya jnana
jnana
Vadnanti nityada muktam
Vadnanti
Vadnanti
yada
nityada
muktam
Mainam purusham gunaha
Mayinam
Mainam
purusham
purusham
Karya effect Karana cause Kartritve inactivities Dravya material Jnana knowledge Kriya ashraya manifested by such symptoms. Badnanti conditions. Nityada eternally. Muktam transcendental. Mayinam affected by material energy. Purusham the living entity. Gunaha the material modes. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. These three modes of material nature, being further manifested as matter, knowledge, and activities, put the eternally transcendental living entity under conditions of cause and effect, and make him responsible for such activities. Purport. Because they are between the internal and external potencies, The eternally transcendental living entities are called the marginal potency of the Lord. Factually, the living entities are not meant to be so conditioned by material energy, but due to their being affected by the false sense of lording it over the material energy, they come under the influence of such potency and thus become conditioned by the three modes of material nature. This external energy of the Lord covers up the pure knowledge of the living entities eternally existing with him. But the covering is so constant that it appears that the conditioned soul is eternally ignorant. Such is the wonderful action of Maya, or external energy, manifested as if materially produced. By the covering power of the material energy, the material scientist cannot look beyond the material causes, but factually, behind the material manifestations, there are Adibhuta, Adhyatma, and Adidaiva actions, which the conditioned soul in the mode of ignorance cannot see. The Adibhuta manifestation entails repetitions of births and deaths with old age and diseases. The Adhyatma manifestation conditions the spirit soul, and the Adidaiva manifestation is the controlling system. These are the material manifestations of cause and effect and the sense of responsibility of the conditioned actors. They are, after all, manifestations of the conditioned state, and the human being's freedom from such a conditioned state is the highest perfectional attainment. Maharaj, would you like to speak on this verse?
The living entity is meant to be free, to be healthy. Healthy state is to be liberated from any diseases, any conditions, such as being under the influence of illusion. You could think of this illusion as some kind of and it's all in his mind, but because of the influence of the drug, his mind is not working correctly. So he begins to play out these roles based on how he's seeing the world, which is through the influence of the drug. So you could say that the living entity is not pure, but actually, originally he is pure. He doesn't come in contact with any of these material things. But because he's small, he's very tiny, he can come under the influence, he can be swayed by these things. Prabhupada gives the example of oil doesn't mix with water, but water can carry oil away. Even though the oil never becomes actually touched by the water, but it can be carried by the water. Similarly, the living entity has no connection actually with matter. He's spiritual, he's part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. But because of his strong desire to be the enjoyer himself, he gets a playground, this material world, where he can try to be the enjoyer. He can try to exploit material nature. It's all in his mind. He won't be able to exploit it. Making him think that he's the enjoyer, his I and mine. So this is how the material energy bewilders one. Some of the descriptions are given here, how the living entity becomes bewildered. And then in that bewildered state, he can go on for millions of lifetimes because he never wakes up from this. Never stops taking the drug. And Maya She's the Lord's energy. And her instructions are, you keep him bound up. Don't let him come out. But the Lord actually wants the living entity to be free from this conditioned state, from this Maya. And therefore, he comes himself to the material world to try to give good advice to the living entities. Like we see Krishna. Krishna has given Bhagavad Gita such an important instruction for all living entities who are conditioned by Maya. Arjuna played the part as if he were conditioned by Maya. And then Krishna sends his devotees in different capacities to teach and to try to wake up the living entities from this sleep and get them to revive their dormant love of Krishna. And that can be done, especially by the process, Shravanam Kirtanam, hearing and chanting about the Lord. It brings him out of the stupor, awakens him. Vedas say, Utishtata Jagrata Prapya Varon Nivodata. Wake up from this deep sleep, like death. Living entities are practically in a dead state. Even though they may be flopping around, acting like they're having a good time, just like chicken with its head cut off. He's still quite active. Even without the head, he goes running around bumping into the walls. And some people are saying, oh, look how happy he is. That's not happiness, that's miserable condition. So the best work that one can do is to assist the Lord in trying to wake up the living entities. Jiv Jago, Gora Chanda Bole, Kota Nidra Jaya Maya Pisha Chirakole. Trying to wake up the sleeping soul. This is Lord Chaitanya's business. He's Krishna, but he's showing what one should do being in the human form of life, and that is to chant the holy names of the Lord and try to encourage everyone to wake up and take up the process of loving Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj. So all living entities in the conditioned state of life are under some restrictions. Oh yes, Acharya Initiative, Prabhu. No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Maharaj, I just had a question on one of your points. One may think, unless the living entity, what's the use of preaching? If they're not able to fully achieve Krishna prema, then you're spending so much energy, they may not be able to take it up, they may not be able to undergo that complete transformation.
But they are able to take it up. It's their natural position. It's the constitutional position of the living entity. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has shown that thousands and millions of people can take it. As he was going around chanting on his he ordered everything. Everyone to go out and fish. Never mind whether so-called concentration. This drive, wherever you lead, tell them about this. And this way, once everything, guru, picture guru, some kind of guru, and how there is.
So there's no freedom in the material world for any condition of the universe. Everyone is bound by these laws of nature. And someone might say, well, that's just where your belief. Well, we can see it's actually very practical. Throughout the whole world, everyone has to die. So that's not just a belief, but it's something that we see all the time. Everyone has to be subjected to or conditioned by death, disease, old age. So from a newspaper or magazine wrote, end of belief, everyone has to die. It wouldn't really seem very relevant, it wouldn't make sense. But this is the most essential knowledge that is needed for everyone, no matter where they're from or what their background is or anything. Because every living entity in this material world is under the conditions of nature. So that means there's no freedom, it's conditional. Even just to use our senses, somebody might want to see very far and try to read something across the room, but our eyes are even perfect. We were actually explaining this and we were trying to explain to him that this is practical knowledge that relates to everything, not just to belief. And I was explaining this example of senses. If our knowledge from our senses, as you were saying, if source of knowledge, I will tell the stories. With their microscope and things like this. But if all these different machines and types of equipment are built with imperfect senses, and then we're gathering information through our imperfect senses with them, then our knowledge is going to be imperfect. So I was explaining this idea of your eyes, if the light goes out, you can't even describe your own hand in front of you. And he said, yeah, that's one way to look at it. I said, well, no, it's a factual thing. He said, well, that's your belief. And I told him, are your eyes perfect? And he said, oh no, my eyesight is so bad. I said, do you have perfect senses? And he was saying, no, I don't. I said, exactly. So it's not a belief. Our senses are imperfect. So we need knowledge from a perfect source. And he just said, well, that's one nice way to look at it. So Prabhupada has called this, the dog's obstinacy. Not even though someone might say they want to know the truth and want to know more about what is happening in life, but then if the truth is presented to them, still they don't take it. So this obstinacy. But we can see there's very factual, practical things being presented here. The living entity is conditioned by the material modes. So every living being in the material world has to undergo this adibhuta, sufferings from the body and the mind. So there's diseases, there's old age, there's birth and death. Everyone has to undergo that. So that's not just based on one person's belief, but we see everyone has to die. So we should plan for what's the solution to get out of this death and out of this disease. And then the two others that were mentioned is adhyatma. So that's the miseries from other living entities. So we can see that people get into fights, into quarrels, disturbances, there's wars between countries. And and then Adidaiva, which is natural forces. Now, if we explain the point that the demigods are causing these, people might not understand that, and that might need some higher knowledge. But we can see everyone is subjected to rain, thunderstorm, cold, heat, all these different natural disturbances. So these things are conditioning the living entities. There's no freedom anywhere in the material world, even though people might make so many different causes and movements and things to try to be free, be more free, or be the most free in the world. Still, there's so many conditions that are put on the living entity. So the best cause to become actually free is to surrender to Krishna, because then one can easily cross over beyond this ocean of material suffering. But any other endeavor is just going to be one will still be bound by these modes of nature. I was just reading in the Bhagavatam recently in this same canto, Krishna was saying to Lord Brahma, "O Brahma, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, has no reality. Know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness." So anything without relation to Krishna is simply his illusory energy. So people might make so many different ways to try to solve the problems of life, but it has no value, because if Krishna isn't in the center of it, then it will only be like a half-baked measure. They won't get the full result of solving any problems, because when one tries to solve something in the material world, they're bound by these modes of nature and they're getting reactions. And those reactions just bring about more problems. And then they can move the material elements around more, try to adjust, and another reaction. And like this, it's a chain of fruitive activities that binds one to the material world. But just by serving the Lord, which can be done in so many ways, one becomes free from all of these entanglements. Krishna is known as Mukunda, or the giver of mukti, or liberation. So that liberation means that one no longer has to be conditioned or dependent on all of these material things. Right now in material life, one might be dependent on their cell phone in order to feel sane. They've got all their whole life on it. They've got all their friends on it. One might be dependent on their friends in order to feel happy in all of these things, or certain foods or exercises or something to be healthy. So they're dependent, they're not free. But if one actually surrenders to Krishna, they lose their taste for all these material things and they become satisfied internally. They don't need anything from the external world to become happy or satisfied. So in this way, they're actually free. They're no longer bound up. They're not a slave to their phone or slave to something else in the material world, but they're actually satisfied simply with their service to the Lord. So that's the only free state in the world. Otherwise, all these other activities and ideas for how to gain freedom, one still has to be subjected to something else. Are there any comments or questions on this so far? Brother Sally?
Hare Krishna. Earlier, you were speaking about how we have imperfect senses, and therefore our knowledge is imperfect. So, because our senses are imperfect, how are we to know that we've received the perfect knowledge when we do?
Well, we can find what is the perfect source of knowledge. So if we hear from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining that everything is coming from him. All material worlds, all spiritual worlds, everything in existence, all the living entities, his separated energy, also the material energy. So we can see he's the perfect source of knowledge. So he makes it easily understandable just by hearing from him. So if we hear from Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, then in a submissive mood, then it's easy to accept, okay, here's the perfect source of knowledge. There's no one else that can actually compete with him. If we just hear from Krishna, he explains so many things that no one else would be able to explain. When he explains about his own position, no one else would be able to claim that about themselves. It wouldn't make any sense for if somebody just walked in and said, "You're all emanating from me," and just some person off the street, and he says, "I'm making all of the worlds and everything." It would make no sense. It'd be foolish. But when Krishna explains it, we can see it actually makes perfect sense. He's saying all these things are coming from him. He's explaining how everything is working. He's explaining how to fully realize this, how to come back to him. So the whole science is there in the Bhagavad Gita. And when we hear with a submissive attitude and a humble mood, then we can easily take what Krishna is saying and accept, okay, this is the highest source of knowledge. Let me just accept the way that he's saying to see the world, accept the instructions that he's giving. Any kind of information that we get in the material world from another source of knowledge, we can see it's always so limited. Just like if we wanted to solve these problems of life, birth, death, disease, and old age, which clearly everyone has to go through, if we hear from some science articles, it's such an imperfect way to try to solve these, because each one, for example, there was one project that I briefly worked on here to make an infographic about the universe. And for it, I wanted to put what each scientist and I was looking up these articles, and each one from the last 100 years, it's like 1900s till now, what scientists say is the age of the universe. Each article has a new date given every couple of years. So, and the article would start off with our present information, we think that the universe may be this old, and they give a date. And then 5 years later, there's another article, and it says, our previous guess was incorrect, but now we know with the information we've been provided at this time that the universe is this old. And then 10 years later, another one saying, actually, we were wrong again, but possibly with our new telescope, the universe may be this old. So we can see this type of information that is called science today. It's not scientific at all, because it's just guessing. The world may be like this, according to our information now. Or an even more kind of a drastic example of this, in schools, I was hearing, it was being taught from one textbook, a certain conclusion about how atoms are functioning or something like this. And this conclusion in the textbooks was already disproved by the modern scientists. They had already found a better thing, and this one was incorrect. But because they had not yet updated their curriculum in the school, you had to study from this book that's giving you the wrong information. And then on the test, in order to pass your test, you have to write the wrong thing in order to pass. And if you write that this is incorrect, then you're wrong, you fail, because they just have to work with the present information that they're given. So we can see this is a completely flawed program. That's why Prabhupada referred to the schools in this day and age as slaughterhouses. It's a slaughterhouse education, because you're not learning how to actually learn, or how to actually be intellectual, or how to solve the problems of life, but you're more or less getting more entangled. It's just, so here's the science class, and in order to be correct in it, you just have to believe what we present and write it on your paper, regardless of if it's right or wrong. So that's not science, that's not real learning, but that's a slaughterhouse education, because it's actually teaching one to be stupid. You have to be incorrect to get the right answers. But if we get perfect knowledge, which is coming from the perfect source, Krishna, we can see there's no change, there's no speculation, there's no verse where Krishna says, maybe it might be like this. Or if you always think of me, it could work out, maybe not. No, he says, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, surrender unto me, and you'll come back to me. I guarantee it. And throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita, everything he's giving is so so authoritative. And every purport that's coming from the acharyas who are in the line coming after Krishna is also so authoritative and perfect. And none of them are contradicting each other. Someone might see apparent contradictions in scripture, but that's the whole purpose of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, is that the acharyas are presenting it as it is so that we can understand it properly. So if we're just reading from Srila Prabhupada's books, he gives us the full understanding that all the acharyas are given. If before we understand these, we try to jump up to this book, this past acharya, and that one, then because we don't have a full understanding, due to our lack of knowledge, we may see some contradiction. But if we take it as it is with the proper system, everything is being given in Prabhupada's books that's needed for one to go back home, back to Godhead. And we read it as it is, we'll see this is perfect knowledge. There's no guessing. There's no, in our last book, we thought it was like this, but now it's actually like this. So this is a much better way to learn. You can't even call the modern learning a way to learn, but this is the most superior way to learn because you're getting it from the perfect source of knowledge. Are there any other comments or questions?
Thank you for your in-depth diving into this. It's nice. But I just had this one question. I just remembered that one time I saw on the internet, one devotee was actually being really offensive towards his guru because his guru was associating with a questionable personality. And so I chose the wrong guru. And I could tell he was in an offensive mood. But that my question is, it raised a doubt that, well, if I do have imperfect senses, then how am I able to recognize that, this person is highly elevated? So is it that if I have these questions, that's my own imperfections and that I am being offensive in that way? Or is it true that my imperfect senses could lead me to, I don't know, is that kind of...
So if we have imperfect senses, how can we how can we find the perfect teacher?
Yeah,
Perfect
pretty
guru.
much.
Is that kind of understanding? So, well, I know in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining that if Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayantite. As they worship me with love, I reveal the path by which they can come to me. So if one is sincere, Krishna, he's revealing the path of how they can find also the sincere teacher. But if one, like there's the whole chapter in Science of Self-Realization, the separating the saints from the swindlers. If one wants to be cheated, then they can easily come to and settle for something that is not the real thing. But if one is sincere, then Krishna will help them find the sincere teacher. By the mercy of Krishna, one gets the guru. By the mercy of guru, one gets Krishna. But also, then when one comes to where they are finding their teacher, their guru, they also have Shastra and the sadhus or the saintly persons. So they should be able to see that also everything is lining up with Shastra and the sadhus or the devotees. And then if they are sincere, if something isn't lining up, then they would be able to see that or maybe ask about that. And then, yeah, if everything is lining up clearly with Shastra, then they know that, okay, I've come to the right place. Because again, we have imperfect senses, but if we're getting knowledge from the perfect person, that knowledge is perfect. Like Prabhupada gives the example of the boy, he asks his father, what is this? And the father says, it's a watch. The kid doesn't know anything about it, but when he tells other people, this is a watch, it's perfect knowledge. So we may have imperfect senses, but we can get perfect knowledge from Shastra and then see the world through that lens, through the lens that Krishna is giving. And then we can know what is a proper teacher, what is a proper student, what is the proper way to go to live and to perform devotional service. Is that enough the answer? I don't know if anyone wants to elaborate. Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.